Well, welcome again. And this episode, we're really happy to welcome our sister, I won't say guest, our sister and friend, Bethany Welch, whose home congregation is in Philadelphia. And there's a special reason why we have Bethany on today's episode.
We don't have a drum or anything like that.
No, we don't have a drum, but you'll give it. You'll give it. Over the years, the U.S. Federation of the Sisters of St. Joseph have spoken about the need for a JPIC office. JPIC meaning Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation. And in recent years, we did have a coordinator, and she needed to move on in life. And so there was a search that was put out, and while many responded to it, I think we have much gratitude to the search team because I think they found the perfect candidate. So beginning May 1st, the Feast of St. Joseph the Worker, how appropriate, I'm happy to announce that our sister Bethany Welch will be the new JPIC coordinator for our U.S. Federation. So thank you for your yes, Bethany.
Thank you, Sister Joan, and thanks, Christian, for having me today. It's a great gift to be here, and it does feel auspicious. I'm on the campus here in Brentwood, and just to be part of what I think of as just such a beautiful expression of our charism, both across the U.S. Federation and across the globe as part of the global sisterhood and the family of Joseph.
This is so exciting because you're kind of like informally my leader, my liaison, my boss, so it's as the Brentwood JPIC. Now, I want to just go completely inside baseball and be silly here for a little bit, but it's funny being a layperson in this role. My friends will ask me, "What do you do for work?" And I'll go, "Yeah, I work with the sisters." Like, what does that mean? I'm like, "Well, yeah." And then I'm like, "How do JPIC?" And then JPIC isn't even like that's a sister. There's all these inside
thing.
sister language.
Yes.
It's like JPIC, and they're like JPEG. You're a JPEG. No, it's this. But then when you look into the history of it, coming from the Hope and Joy document of the '60s, and how everything that are campus ministries, peace and justice groups, all the integral work of mission has been rooted in where this comes from. It's really inspiring. So what does it mean to you when you hear JPIC?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's also, relatively new. I'm 5 years in religious life. I went through the U.S. Federation novitiate. And so I think for me, the JPIC piece it's part and parcel of who we are as sisters, but it's also, my family's not Catholic. And so a lot of the Catholic lingo and the sister lingo, and then peace and justice lingo is new, but they've been living it. And most people of faith and goodwill are already living this work, right? So part of what we're giving is language and a structure at times, and hopefully more so an invitation to join this work of justice and peace. So I think it seemed similar to you when I was explaining to my family, what is it you're going to be doing? And I was like, I'm going to come alongside people who are doing great work, hopefully amplify and maybe sometimes animate, right? Sometimes animate. But I think it's really looking at where is God at work in the world already and how can we come alongside people. And then maybe, often this is a great example for us, right? But pass the microphone. So there's somebody already doing amazing work who's already mindful of the people and folks on the margins. And so it's giving that individual the mic, right? And so my job, I think, is to zoom out a little bit, see what's happening, listen. It's a wonderful time to start this after we've been practicing synodal listening for a couple years now in the church. So it's unique, right? The Catholic lingo, sister lingo, but really it's just giving language to something we already do.
Yeah, and every industry has lingo. That's just how it is. So it's just kind of fun. What made you want to reach out and go for this opportunity, this experience?
So I think for much of my professional career, and then certainly has been true in religious life, I've moved back and forth between kind of system structure, macro work, and then neighborhood, community-based work. So I spent the last 2 years in a community-based setting working with homeless college students and students experiencing housing insecurity. So across the country, this program through DePaul USA called DAX. So really was in it it's a residential program, right? Transitional housing. So it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, accompanying young adults who've experienced some of the most difficult traumas, and that intersection of the higher ed crisis with the housing crisis, with immigration, all sorts of other issues. And so it was very hands-on. And it was beautiful. And then, as many people are experiencing now, there's a lot of public funding changes in how we fund programs and ministries. And so my position was actually eliminated, and I was not expecting it. And so I think in some ways, the discernment, I was not ready for discernment for a new ministry. Like I thought, oh, I'll do this for a couple of years and we'll see where God takes it. And then suddenly found myself like, well, I know I'm really drawn to working with our charism in some way. And I had felt like that was a gap in my ministry, was that I, being newer to religious life, I had not had the opportunity to be in a ministry recently with our sisters. And then I was like, okay, well, what's available in my own congregation? And then when the Federation position was posted, I said, well, gosh, that's an opportunity to really do something with a group that I already knew from being in the Federation novitiate. And I had 2 years as the JPIC lead for the Major Superiors of Men, which is the men's conference for religious. So in the U.S., again, inside baseball, in the U.S., there are 2 conferences for women religious. In the U.S., there's 1 for men. And so for 2 years, I did that work. And so it's very comparable to this. So again, it's like zooming out from the neighborhood level. But because of the neighborhood work and being directly with impacted people, I think that informs this new ministry for me. And I think the desire too to just, again, re-engage what I missed after being in the Federation novitiate was that global sisterhood. And so this is another way to just reconnect with that network. And everywhere I go, right, there's expressions of the family of Joseph. And so how to be with those folks and to really have a sense of like, what do you care about? What's important in your community, which might be different than where I sit in Philly. We're a pretty urban space, and it's very different, being on the campus here in Brentwood, and like land issues, right, are very at the forefront. So I'm drawn to the ability to both like be with and accompany, but then also to see the big picture. I'm also drawn at this moment in our history of the U.S. I think we're in a moment where the sisters and the charism matters, to be a healing presence, to be an expression of unioning love in a time of great fracture. There's a moment, I think, in the national dialogue that has a space for what we might be able to bring. And so that felt like a more urgent invitation than some of the other ministry opportunities I was looking at.
Yes, yes. And again, here's a little non-speak or inside language. That word charism, right? A gift, a grace, and it's that gift, particular to the family of Joseph, that is one of active inclusive love, one that brings about a unity, a unifying love, and you certainly possess it. You're a woman steeped in prayer, the spirituality, and you use this gift to move the mission forward, the mission of God towards a greater oneness, not a sameness, but a oneness. And so also thinking about your experience, not only your background, but then your previous ministries, previous work. And I'm also thinking, you talked about this campus, and I know that you were part of really teasing out the Laudato Si action platform prior to this, and now we are coming up to the 10-year anniversary of this really monumental encyclical, to all people of goodwill and our relationship with the whole community of life. How do you see integrating some of that into this position through the Federation and with the other JPIC coordinators?
Sure. Yeah, so one of the unique things when I worked for the Major Superiors of Men was working then with the Vatican Dicastery for Integral Human Development. And so, you're on these Zooms at 4 o'clock in the morning, Rome time, everything's on Rome time, and seeing what was so deeply embedded in Pope Francis's vision for our world come out into really tangible ways for religious and then parishes and schools and all people to take care of the earth and to hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. So this feels like I took a little pause, and now I get to come back to that, and maybe even like in his memory, in his honor, right? Start to identify more and more of the places where it's already happening. So I know so many sisters and campuses of our sponsored works who have taken Laudato Si seriously and are implementing it. And then other people who've really been steeped in the spirituality and in the contemplative side of the encyclicals, and are now ready to be animated, right? And so I think some of it is bringing those groups together. We've had some beautiful projects in Philly where young people who are so mindful of the issue of climate change and feel it like in their bodies are coming alongside sisters who maybe aren't as aware and don't feel a sense of urgency because of where they are in life, but they are very tapped into the new cosmology or the teachings of the church around social justice. And so seeing those two groups in dialogue, you know, a sister in her 80s and then a young person, a 19-year-old from the college, talk about why does climate change matter and how might it be impacting our, not only our now, but our future. To me, it's some of that, is like bringing some of our groups into conversation with one another. And then the practical piece. I think some of our young people are really leading the way when it comes to making new choices about what we use, how we use it, what we need. And even as a sister who's taken a vow of poverty, there's always fresh invitations to be conscious of my consumer habits. And so I think the dialogue, and then I think often in JPIC work, we're looking for entry points and pathways. Right, so how can I create an entry point for someone who hasn't touched Laudato Si, and then what's the pathway for someone who's really embodied it and wants to go deeper? So I think those are two kind of invitations for me this year.
You're offering so much here. It's like my brain. This is really, really exciting. And yeah, the animation element though, and like it's interesting. I didn't know this about you, but you said that you didn't grow up Catholic.
No.
What did you study in college? I'm just curious.
Depends. So my
Yeah, tell me a little bit about this.
undergrad is in studio art and graphic design.
Okay.
So I really thought my grandmother was an artist. I thought I would be an artist. But I was also in the honors program. And so the honors advisor said, you know, there's maybe some other content you want to incorporate. So I took on a second major in communication. So less AV and more like rhetoric and persuasion, argumentation and debate. Really ideas, like how do we think about ideas? How do we communicate ideas? So that was my undergrad. And then I started for a hunger relief organization as their graphic designer, but was more captivated by the questions around the social policy issues. Why are people hungry in the US? And so the executive director gave me a ton of opportunities to go on the policy side, and that's really where kind of the rest of my career unfolded. Yeah, so I think the entry point for me was very much, you know, what's happening in our country and why are things the way they are, and so had the opportunity to kind of move through that, sometimes on the academic side, sometimes on the community side, usually in dialogue with each other. And then my last sort of main degree is a PhD in public policy with a concentration in urban studies. So, but almost always through the lens of Catholic social teaching. So when I became Catholic, which is kind of also part of my academic journey of really being in an urban neighborhood in Philly where they were reusing church property for the social good, that's been really the through line of like stewardship.
Did you become Catholic during in college?
No,
or like, you don't have to tell the full story, but I'm just kind of, you know, it's interesting when you hear someone speak so confidently about something and the way you are about justice and things, you start to piece together like, wow, somebody, I could sense that there's a really wonderful, I mean, we could do this for like 2 hours. Your story, I could feel in the way that you carry yourself that it's a grace and it's lovely. And so I'm just a little bit curious. That's all. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So certainly grew up in this, you know, incredibly loving, generous family, different expression of Christianity, but also very socially engaged, but on issues maybe less that impacted the margins and more what impacted our family. So there were some concerns my parents had about kind of laws and regulations. I grew up in upstate New York. So anything that my parents were concerned about, they had a deep sense of agency in a democracy, right? That you can take action. You can talk to your legislator, you can go to the town meeting. So I joke, you know, some of my earliest memories, I have 2 younger brothers, and was me like wrangling them at community meetings with like a tote bag and coloring books. And then mom and dad are like speaking to someone important, or we're, you know, in a church hall, like with a bunch of other people who care about an issue. So really invested in that. And I think my parents modeled that so well for us. We were always praying for our elected officials, you know, a tremendous sense of understanding civics and social studies. So I carried that forward, but had a very different expression of maybe God's love and what Christ came for. And so I went and did a year of service between my master's and the PhD program. And I did it in North Philadelphia, which is a pretty under-resourced community in Philly. And I didn't understand at the time that I was being assigned as a full year of service through AmeriCorps, through the federal government, but to what was essentially a Catholic parish and a school and a community organizing group that was opening a community center in an old building. And it was, the school had been run by the Sisters of St. Joseph for 100 years. The priests were all steeped in liberation theology in Latin America, and it had been returning from mission, and we're bringing all of that into this immigrant neighborhood. So it was really like, you know, front seat to the gospel. And so what had really been for me for a couple of years like a head understanding of Catholicism and a lot of like intellectual study of Augustine and Aquinas took on flesh in the street, in the neighborhood. And yeah, so I kept saying to the sisters and the priests, I'm like, I'm ready to go home. This was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, to be with people who were suffering so significantly. And I said, how do you stay? And they were like, Jesus. And I was like, I feel like I know Jesus, you know, I feel like I know this person. And they said, no, this is a Christ who doesn't like rescue you from, but is with you in it. And so in the street, in the suffering, in the immigration injustices, in the poverty, in the racial discrimination, Christ was with and for, and then the desiring our full thriving, right? And I was like, oh, the Eucharist is what was different for me. Like, I didn't understand that fully, and that was completely embodied in that parish. And so I went through RCIA at that parish, and then took 20 years to hang out with our sisters and some other congregations of women, and then entered in 2020. So.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's really beautiful.
And just to go back when you to your undergraduate degree, and you said, and I've seen some of your artwork, so you are an artist, plus, you know, and I just think how important. I always think of the artist as the soul of our society, you know, bringing the balm, the healing, the awareness, the consciousness, right? And what an alignment of being an artist and now being a JPIC coordinator, you know, and how you can help and will facilitate that healing and that movement towards wholeness and oneness. And do you see any way that you would bring like the whole art into this JPIC work?
So that's a great question, Joan. I know one of the things in the search committee had asked, you know, how do you manage like the stress of this kind of role? Because a lot of what I will have to re-engage with after putting it down for a few years is the news, right? The breaking news story, the desire to be responsive in a timely fashion to something that is maybe joyful, but often suffering. And so in my answer in that interview, like art is a way I process what's happening in the world. But I also, to your point, I think it is a way to bring other people in and to, in a centered way, sit with our understanding of each other, of fracture, of brokenness, but as also of the Holy Spirit's accompaniment and presence, and then God's love for us. So I think sometimes the embodied practices, right, can really ground us. So I think that is certainly an invitation. And then I also think the artists can kind of call forth maybe what we don't see yet. And so I find, you know, maybe contemplating other people's work or incorporating that into the messaging around justice, it gives your heart like a space to rest for a minute. So if we're seeing images of just incredible trauma and war and conflict, and then also sit with those moments of great humanity. I think of photography or the work you do, Christian, with video and audio, like the storytelling. I think image can really play a part in that. So I'll be curious to see where it might unfold.
What excites you most about this position?
Really, for me to sit with the great grace of our charism, of this gift of understanding God's desire for union, to come together as people in relationship with God, with each other, with the earth, to just be a messenger of that, right? On a I don't want to say a bigger scale, because I don't think what was doing in Philly is any different or better or worse, but there's a network and a connectedness, almost like weaving, right? Like, so I think about from coast to coast, from, you know, border to border, all of these communities of St. Joseph that have been living their lives and living the charism. And so as I can kind of go from place to place, either virtually or hopefully in person, and to hear those stories and to continue to weave that together. And so to both be like a sacred listener and then, like I said, an animator. And if there are new ideas, right, to raise that forth. I think some of the things I've done have been a little entrepreneurial, and I think we need that spirit now, you know, with the loss of so much public funding and changes in our laws. Like, how can we call on the Holy Spirit to invite us to be innovative and creative and generative? I think that word generative is something I'm really excited about, because I can see it, and the grace of being a novice for 2 years was we did travel around a bit and meet different people, and sometimes when you've been in an institution too long, like, you lose some of that. But I think the fresh eyes of having been with many sisters in many communities, and to say, let's like call it forth and put it in the mix and see where God continues to water and put sun on it and fertilize it and continue it to grow.
There's a great answer that leads right into, you're starting at a point now where the 375 celebration is happening, and we're in that year, and this summer will be the big calling together of everyone for our event in Kansas City. And so what does that mean to you to one, be a sister and to be able to take that in, but now in this role and nationally be able to take that in?
Yeah, I think the 375 could be a moment where we simply look back, right? And I think that would be a grace and to sit with the history and to celebrate it. I also think it's a moment for where do we want to be and what's ours to do, right? And so as people are discerning, attending, or they're getting their tickets ready, like just to be praying with that, like where are we as St. Joseph's, under St. Joseph's mantle, and where are we in the spirit of Pope Francis? Is there something about his life and legacy and mission and desire for all of humanity to be one? Can we somehow embody that going forward? So I'm excited about what has been and then what's possible.
Yeah, I'm smiling here because the words you're using, like entrepreneurial, experiment. 375 years, we were an experiment. And over the course of our history, we were quite entrepreneurial, setting up school systems, hospital systems, working in parishes, social ministries, advocacy, and so on. And so here we are 375 years later, really in a state of chaos, in a state of breakdown, deconstruction. And yes, the call is to be entrepreneurial. So I think we definitely have a good person in this position. Just want to say that.
Well, you said like the words, it's like, I feel like it is like this word search of exciting, animated words that like are speak to the truth of what this work is. And so I'm really excited, and I'm excited to walk with you and then to also bear witness. And I think you said something, so you were in North Philly and you were doing service. It's really cool too how your work of direct service is feeding now where you are in this macro kind of experience. And I think the grace that will come from that is really special. So
thank you so much. And I think it's always a tension, right? As a sister or as a follower of Christ, of where can my gifts best be used? And I think as a kid, I had a clear vision of how I thought that would be. And then God and I have gone back and forth at different times. And so even in this discernment for this position to say, like, do I want to, spend a bit more time on Zoom than I was doing previously, a little bit more, it's a different expression of who we are. But I think, we're all discerning that choice. And so I would invite others, like, as wherever you're located in this moment too, like, what is God inviting me to? Because I don't know that I would have chosen this. Like, I don't know that I would have picked it from a menu of things, but when it was posted, I thought, like, yeah, okay, this is like something's moving, right? The Spirit's moving. So I think that too is also part of my message of just like, what's God inviting you to now? Because it is different. Even when I went to my leadership team and to my formators, and they said, well, I thought you were doing this. And I said, well, also that was a different year, right? So January 20th introduced a lot of new things into our society. And what does that mean? So the capacity to be responsive, I think, is a trait I really value. And so things will change around us, sometimes beyond our control. And so in that new moment of discernment, what is God inviting you to? So I think that's also, not just the like moving from one space to another, but even within the context of things that move around you.
Your awareness of that, I think, is so admirable and appropriate, because same when I was starting this, I came from campus ministry, and I was like right in with the students and like mission trips, and I loved it. And I had a vision that was going to be for much longer, and I felt God calling me out of that. And I was like, I don't know, And then the same thing, and I remember sitting and saying that to my wife, being like, all right, it's going to be a lot more Zooms, probably going to be, there's not going to be like, I'm not going to be in that same feeling, but there's something there. And maybe and for me, what I found in this is that God's calling me to hand the microphone over more and to be aware of my own privileges. And then in that, where can you connect the dots for other people? And so I think that's the fact that you're saying all that and you're aware of all that is so exciting, because that's been what I've been noticing for myself. And there's so many moments where I'm like, wow, it's really nice to meet other people. And most rooms I go into, like, I'm the minority, and I should be. And I should be listening to these other stories. And it's really special. But it's different. It's so different. Yeah. So I'm so excited. We'll see you at 375, and I'm sure we'll have you on again, and we'll be talking and chopping it up more because there's going to be a lot to learn from your experiences. And I think we should do a whole episode on just art and your artwork. What's your medium of choice?
Usually like mixed media collage, so
Oh.
acrylic and then other, whether it's found objects or paper or,
I see this whole room being redecorated and all. Maybe our future studio space.
Masterpieces, they're quite
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, no, they are really. Yeah.
Oh, it's great.
I think this is, again, another opportunity to say thank you to you, Bethany, for your yes, and all that you are and will bring to this position, and also to all of those within our family of Joseph who are about the work of justice. I mean, we're all contemplative, prayerful people that moves us out to action, uniting with God, self, and neighbor with neighbor. And from whom we do not separate ourselves, right? And to always live in that holy disquietude, what's going on in us and around us that we need to respond. And while justice work is important and necessary, it's challenging, and it can wear the soul. And I'm so grateful that in your position you don't only have the Federation staff to work with and be with, but then all of the justice coordinators, really, not only in the United States, Canada, and throughout the world. And so a great gratitude. We're with you. We support you, and just continue to lead us and guide us. And the reign of God will come. The kingdom will appear. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you all next time.